joined us today. This program is created by the Center for the Study of Art, Architecture, History, and Nature, and ImagineLifelongLearning.com. Now, I'm excited to tell you that John Spears, the director of the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library, is our speaker today. It's been a tradition since we started this program that early in September every year, we get an update about our wonderful downtown and Buffalo and Erie County Public Library system. Now, before we get started, however, just a little housekeeping. Everyone watching will be muted and your video turned off. If you have a question or comment, please type it into the chat box and we'll go through them at the end of the presentation. We are recording this program, so you can watch it again later on the Downtown Central Library's Facebook page and the YouTube channel. And we certainly hope you share the link with others. Now, on to our featured speaker, John Spears. John joined the library system in April of 2022, just about 17 months ago, from the Pikes Peak Library System in Colorado. In his short time here in Buffalo, John Spears is credited with managing a number of exciting initiatives for the community, including the 37 libraries have gone fine-free in an effort to erase barriers to library use that disproportionately affect low-income households, and the recent reopening of two major libraries in the city of Buffalo, the Crane branch and the Gonzales Soto branch, following long-term construction project closures. John also worked closely with the library employees and local service agencies following the May 14th top shooting, which took place just a short distance from the Meriwether Branch Library. In his first year, John Spears also proactively dealt with the challenges of crowds of sometimes unruly teenagers coming to the library after the school day ended. Today, John is here to talk about an upcoming library system awareness campaign, one that he is quite knowledgeable about: an individual's right to read what they want without someone determining it for them, also known as banning books. So let's welcome John and let's hear what this banning books means to us. John?
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Let me share my screen 1 second. Okay, does everyone see a Buffalo and Erie County Public Library slide? Yes? Okay. Well, thank you. So before I get into book banning, I want to talk about something that's related and another initiative that we have right now, which is National Library Card Sign-Up Month, which is this month in September. And this is a way that we want to encourage the entire community, people who don't have a library card, to come and get one and see everything it is that the library has to offer. Now, I want to use that as a frame for my discussion on what is happening right now in the country. And I think a lot of people are aware, if they have been watching the news, that there has been a huge uptick in book banning in the United States, in all sorts of libraries. When I talk about this, though, I want to always try as much as possible to bring it back to the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. And to do that, I want to start with what our mission and our vision are. So our mission is to connect our diverse community with library resources that enrich, enlighten, and entertain. And there I want to stress that we are a diverse community, that we serve all of Erie County, which is urban areas, suburban areas, rural areas. There are places that are blue, places that are red. We have an incredible variety of people, of demographics that are represented here. And all of them have a say in what this library is to the community. Now, our vision is that the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library is to be deeply rooted in the community, promoting partnerships, fostering the development of a literate and informed citizenry through free and equal access to cultural, intellectual, recreational, and informational resources, planning for the future, and making the most effective use of taxpayer funding. And what I want to stress in that is the concepts of free and equal access. And when you combine those two, what it really says is that every person in this community, regardless of who they are, regardless of what they believe, has ownership in this library, and that they have free and equal access to it. Now, this isn't something that is just important to us here, though, at Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. This is really built on some fundamental ethics and some fundamental beliefs that we have as a profession, as librarians. And one of the documents that is best for that is something that's called the American Library Association Library Bill of Rights. Now, this is not something new. This is something that the American Library Association initially adopted in June of 1939. You know what was going on in the world at that time. And it was last affirmed by the American Library Association in 2018. So this is a document that for nearly a century has guided libraries in terms of how we should operate. And this is built around the fact that people have a right to the materials that they want to see, and that the library should not be removing materials, that we have information that is presented on all points of view, that we should challenge censorship every chance that we get, and that the right of someone to use a library should not be denied because of their origin, their age, their background, or their views. Now, one of the things that was added recently to this is point 7 under there, which is that everyone has a right to privacy and confidentiality in their library use as well, and that we should be at the forefront of educating people about that. So when you look at our own mission, our own values, our own vision, and then the fundamental document that explains people's rights to information, all of that is a bit under attack right now. So this is a woman named Terry Leslie, and she was the director of the Campbell County Library in Wyoming. She'd been employed by that library for over 20 years and had been the director for 12 of those. She was recently fired because she refused to remove books from the shelf. These were books on topics that some in the community considered controversial, mainly books on issues around race, issues around sexuality. And when she refused to remove them, her position was terminated. This is the Patmos Library in Michigan. It's in Jamestown Township. This library has been defunded. In other words, the residents voted in one instance with over 60% voting. They voted to remove all funding for the library. It was put for another vote, and it was successful again. This library was defunded because they wanted a collection that actually reflected the entire community. And there were people that not want to see certain books on the shelf. And when the library refused to remove them, the community basically voted that they would rather not have a library at all. Now, this is up for a third vote in November, and we will see what happens. But this could possibly be the first library in the country to be completely defunded because they refuse to censor materials. And what you're looking at here is graffiti that was put on a library in Maryland that says groomer. And libraries across the country are seeing violence. They're seeing people show up with guns. They're seeing armed groups show up at certain programs. And they're seeing things that have not been seen in decades in this country. There are libraries that have gotten bomb threats. There are librarians who have had bomb threats and violence threatened against them. This is something new. in terms of what we are seeing in the scope of this, the breadth of this, and people's willingness to resort to firing staff, to threats of violence, to defunding entire libraries. And here's some statistics that kind of show you how bad this is. This is statistics kept by the American Library Association on the number of attempts to ban or restrict library materials. You can see that from 2003 to 2020, it was, hovering around 500 until about 2012, and actually started to dip a bit between 2012 and 2020 and 2020. And then all of a sudden in 2021 and 2022, it skyrocketed. And the American Library Association in 2021 saw more challenges than they had ever seen in their history. And then that number was increased by over 500 by the time we hit 2022. Now, these are only the ones that have actually been reported. There are probably quite a few more that have occurred, or a lot of things that have happened quietly or softly because they might have never actually risen to the level of a challenge. The other thing that can happen when materials are challenged to the extent and people start losing their jobs is that there will be a self-censorship that will happen in libraries where, in order to avoid controversy, some libraries might not purchase material that they might consider could be subject to a challenge. Now, the other thing that has changed is not just the number of challenges, but the number of unique titles that are challenged. So while there was, 1,200 challenges, that encompassed a total of nearly 2,600 separate titles, which is an increase from almost 1,900 in 2021, which is almost, 9 times what we saw in 2020. So this isn't just a small increase. We are seeing numbers and challenges and attempts to ban materials at levels that have not existed since the American Library Association began keeping records. The other thing that is happening is that very often in the past, challenges were done by a parent or a member of a community, and they would challenge one book. They might have seen their child brought home a book that they questioned whether it was appropriate, and so they would issue a challenge to the library and request that the material be moved. That was the vast majority of challenges. What we're seeing now, though, is that 90% of all challenges books were part of attempts to ban multiple titles. And this very often can be the case where someone is bringing in a list of 50, a list of 100 titles. And these are very consistent titles that are being challenged around the entire United States. And what that's showing us as librarians is that this is a bit of a coordinated effort, because when we're asking people, have you actually read these materials? The answer very often is no, but they just know that they don't belong in libraries. So how this breaks down is that about 30% of challenges are initiated by parents, about 28% are by patrons of other types, and then you have political and religious groups. Challenges can even come within a library, and 15% of the time it actually comes from the board or from administration. 3% of the time it comes from librarians themselves. Another 3% comes from elected officials. So the challenges are still coming from a variety of people, but they do happen in libraries of all types. Nearly half of the challenges are happening in public libraries. 48% of challenges are happening in public libraries. A little bit less than that, 41% are happening in school libraries, and then 10% in schools, and 1% in higher education and academic libraries. So the majority of them are in public libraries. You hear a lot more about the school challenges in school libraries on the news, but the reality is that most of the challenges are happening in public libraries. I don't want you to think also that it's just books that are being challenged. About 80% of the challenges are books. But there's other things that people are challenging because they don't think it's appropriate to have in a library. Things like displays and exhibits, or programs, or films, or that, all-encompassing other. But only about 4/5 of the challenges are books, and the rest of it can be any other type of service that a library offers, things like displays or programs. Now, there's one other thing that we are seeing that's very consistent when it comes to the titles that are being challenged. These are the 13 most challenged items in libraries. And what you'll notice, normally there's only 10, but there was actually a tie, two ties. And so there's 13 this year. And one thing that you might notice about these titles is that, with one exception, every title on this list is either by or about a person of color or a member of the LGBTQ community. And that is the reality for these titles that are being challenged. That is something that is consistent across schools, across public libraries around the entire country. Now, when we make the decision to purchase something at our library, it's not a random decision. We have a collection development policy that actually guides the decisions that we make. And it is very explicit that it says that we don't necessarily endorse the beliefs or views, and that when we select an item, it doesn't imply that we endorse it, or it doesn't imply that we agree with the viewpoint of the author or the content of the item. We try as much as possible to represent the entire community. And so we don't stand behind that this is the view that you should follow. Now, the other important part of our collection development policy is that we don't stand in loco parentis. We do not act as the parent or the legal guardian of a child. And the parents themselves are responsible for monitoring their children's use of reading, viewing, and listening material. We can't be responsible for what every child reads. What we can be responsible for is offering as broad a selection as possible, and then allowing the parents to help guide the decisions that their child makes. So when we look at that type of thing, we look at the entire community, and we provide access to millions of physical and virtual items. And that encompasses the full breadth of human creativity. And we offer programs as well, thousands of them, that hopefully reflect the entire spectrum of our community. And these are meant for everyone. But the reality is that no one person is going to look at all, 3 million items that we have, or attend the thousands of programs that we do. So what we want to do is make sure that we offer what people want is included. But unfortunately, what can happen, and this happens with challenges, is that people want things removed. So an important thing to think about when we talk about our relationship with the community is that to serve our entire community, our role is not to remove what some may find objectionable, but to ensure that we offer what those people might want included. And here's kind of a visual representation of what that means. Imagine that this is all the services, all of the materials, all of the programs that we offer. Each dot represents one book, one program, one service. Now, no one person is going to be interested in all of them. These circles kind of might represent the subset that each person is interested in. So there's a much smaller subset that's of interest or relevant to every individual. What's important is that every person deserves their circle in our collection. They deserve for the collection and the services to reflect them, to be of interest to them. But their interest should stop at their own circle. They should be able to make sure that they have one, but they should not be able to dictate what is in anyone else's circle. Now, it doesn't mean that people don't have a right to challenge, that don't have a right to question why something might be in our system. And we have a process for how that works. It's called a request for reconsideration. And it is a very prescribed process. So the first thing that would happen is someone will fill out a request for reconsideration of library materials. And then there will be a written response that will come from me or one of my designees within 15 business days. So far, since I've been here, I've always responded to them myself, though. Now, if the person isn't satisfied with the response, they do have the right to make an appeal to the Board of Trustees. And then the Board of Trustees would make a final determination. They would actually review the appeal, and they have the final authority concerning the material. Now, very often we're asked to remove items from the collection, and very often these are items in the children's section that people feel are inappropriate. Now, what can happen when people make that request is we might actually agree that it's inappropriate for the children's collection, but instead of removing it from all of our libraries, we would move it to the young adult section or maybe move it to the adult section. That does happen. And there are times where someone might do a request for reconsideration and we would remove it from the collection. For instance, if someone pointed out that we have medical information that is out of date or scientific information that is no longer factual, that could be the reason that we would remove something from the library. And that kind of thing does happen. Now, very often when people want to challenge a material, it starts off with just a conversation. And it's rare that it actually goes all the way here, because very often in talking with our staff, in learning about how the library functions and how we want to represent everyone in the community, they'll recognize that, okay, they might find this objectionable, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't serve someone else's purpose. Now, when people do fill out the request for reconsideration, we do ask for some information from them. We want to know, do you represent yourself or do you represent an organization or a group? What are your specific objections to the material? Did you read, listen, or view the entire work? Very often people will challenge something because of one passage that they know about, one paragraph that they find objectionable, without necessarily looking at the context of how that fits into the whole work. So we want to make sure that if someone is actually asking for something to be removed, that they have taken the time to enjoy the entire work, to read the entire work, to listen to it, or to view it. If they haven't, we just want to know what parts they have examined. And then we ask, what would you like us to do with this material? They have the option of asking for it to be removed, but sometimes they just might want it moved to a different area. So there is a process in place for how we handle challenges to materials. But right now, I want to get a little bit back to the Library Bill of Rights. In addition to the Library Bill of Rights, there are a lot of interpretations of the Library Bill of Rights. And these are documents that are actually have been adopted by the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library Board of Trustees. So these aren't just esoteric documents that exist out there. These are documents that bind us, that explain how we should work and how we should interpret those 7 points of the Library Bill of Rights. Now, some of them are ones that can be pretty obvious in terms of how it fits in with the concept of intellectual freedom. Things like access to digital resources and services, or access to library resources and services for minors. Some of them might be a little bit, require a little bit more kind of thinking of, okay, economic barriers to information access. Well, that's something that, as Dennis mentioned, we actually have embraced here as recognizing that that is a barrier. And when we went fine free, we saw that as tied in with intellectual freedom. So within the economic barriers to information, for instance, are paragraphs that say things like all resources provided directly or indirectly by the library, regardless of format or method of delivery, should be readily and equitably accessible to all library users. Imposing any financial barrier may disadvantage users, and libraries of all types should consider eliminating barriers that limit access to library resources and other services. This is an example of how we looked at fine free and recognized that this is also a part of people's right to read. This is a part of their ability to use the resources. And it goes beyond just fines. It says libraries should examine policies and procedures, particularly those involving fines, fees, or other user charges, and actively move towards eliminating any that may create potential barriers to access or academic achievement. So that includes things such as rules related to personal belongings or hygiene requirements or verification of a permanent address, access to an email account or computer. Every time we put a requirement for people to use the library, it's going to be a barrier. And in its own way, that is the same as a book challenge. When a book is removed from the library, or when someone is not even allowed to use the library resources, that's when we are standing against the ethics that bind us. Now, another one of the interpretations of the Bill of Rights is one that's very important, and that's the universal right to free expression. And what I want to stress here is that when there are challenges that are happening around the country, and when libraries are censoring materials, very often under political pressure, or in the case of some states now, under legal requirement, Florida, Iowa, several states have passed laws that are requiring libraries to censor certain materials. And this is something that we are ethically called to stand against. In the Universal Right to Free Expression, it says any action that denies the inalienable human rights of individuals only damages the will to resist oppression, strengthens the hand of the oppressor, and undermines the cause of justice. We believe that censorship corrupts the cause of justice and contributes to the demise of freedom. And then earlier it says, we urge libraries and librarians everywhere to resist such abuse of governmental power and to support those against whom such governmental power has been employed. This is one thing that unites libraries. When there is a challenge to a school library or a challenge to a public library, it does not just affect that library itself. We are all called upon to fight that censorship wherever it might occur. And I want to end by restating something that I said at the very beginning. To serve the entire community, our role is not to remove what some may find objectionable, but to ensure that we offer what they want available. Everyone has the right to see themselves reflected in this library. And when someone challenges material, very often what we will try to do is not remove it, but to find out what they would like to see in the library and make sure that we have that. And then make sure that parents and citizens, residents are able to see their full selves reflected in the library and not a sanitized version that other people might wish. Thank you.
John, thank you very much. This was very timely and appropriate for us in Buffalo to connect with the rest of the country and see what's going on as it relates certainly to libraries. Folks, I trust this generates some questions. I'd be surprised if it doesn't. So please submit those. Joy is waiting to monitor those and will let us know. But John, I'll start with this. Just a program like this is an example of a library being so much more than books, magazines, videos, that sort of thing. It's really become this integrated system, especially at the county level. I would think you are the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. Is there good connections with issues? We hear so much about zip code variations relative to health, wealth, education. Is the library serving through its branches and through your leadership? Is it connected with all these different social agencies, health agencies that the county itself would have? Do you feel that synergy since you've been here for the last year and a half?
I really do. I think that there are a lot of partnerships that the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library has with agencies. You've mentioned Erie County, and I can talk specifically about two issues that have recently really risen to the fore here at the Central Library regarding people who are experiencing homelessness, and then also issues around security, specifically with the teens. And we reached out to several of the agencies in both of those areas and actually brought together pretty large groups that were able to start a discussion of how we can work together. Now, that's just here at Central, and that is actually happening around the entire system. We do not want a cookie cutter library where, for instance, North Park is going to be the exact same as Meriwether, is going to be the exact same as Gonzales. Each of those libraries serves a different community, and the hope and the reality very often is that each of those branches would have specific relationships with the community groups in their areas, whether they're governmental or whether they might be nonprofit or whether they might just be sometimes those kind of informal groups that exist in every neighborhood. Now, across Erie County, we have 22 member libraries, separate from just the libraries here in Buffalo. And each of those libraries has a director that is making connections constantly with the groups in their community and trying to forge those relationships so that the library doesn't just stand alone as an island, but is integrated into the entire fabric of that community.
We every survey I've ever heard shows great local support for the library.
Yes.
Uh, are you somewhat shocked that this other library would have 2 votes and find 60% of the people not supportive of the library, willing to close it down, if I heard you correctly?
Unfortunately, right now, I'm not surprised. A lot of people would like to think that this is the kind of thing that happens in rural Wyoming, that these types of incidents, that's an extreme case, defunding the library. But when you look at the broader scope of the types of things that are happening now at libraries, it's not limited to rural or urban or any libraries of any specific type. For instance, there was a program that happened at the Queens Library. Queens, one of the most diverse neighborhoods, diverse places in the entire country. And they had people showing up and trying to start fights. They had violence outside of one of their libraries because of a program that was being offered that people didn't necessarily agree with. In Alameda County, in the Bay Area of San Francisco Bay Area, they had armed militiamen from the Proud Boys show up at one of their programs because they did not think it was something that the library should be offering. I would wish that this was a surprise, and I think that one of the reasons that we want to educate the public on the importance of this and the fact that this is happening is it's something that a lot of people would like to think isn't possible where they are, but it is. It's possible anywhere in this country. And we want to educate people now so that they can see the importance of battling this, and that this isn't something that affects other people. This is something that can affect anyone.
I have a couple questions.
Good, Joy.
A couple questions that have come in. First, I want to tell you, John, that several people have thanked you for educating them on this, and someone specifically wrote, "It's inspiring to learn more about how the library system's approaching these challenges. How can we as concerned citizens and book lovers support the library? What can we do?" And we are announcing this. John's going to be on a publicity train going around, but we're making a formal announcement on September 26th with the media to talk more about the programs and things that we're doing. And I'll leave that over to John, and I will share my screen and show our webpage.
Okay. So at the beginning of October is Banned Book Week. And that is going to be kind of one of the focus that we're going to have moving forward. It's October 1st through the 7th. And we have programs that are going to be built around this. We're bringing in speakers. We're having giveaways at some of the libraries, movies. We even have library cards that we're rolling out that are specific to this. Come to those events, learn about it. But I think one of the most important things that people can do when it comes to fighting this is be willing to have discussions, be willing to talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors about the fact that this is happening around the country, and let people know that you stand against this. Very often when people are banning books, as I've said before, it tends to be books that are about people of color, by or about, or members of the LGBTQ community. A lot of times it's issues that tackle race relations in a way that makes some people uncomfortable. And let your friends know, let the people, the circles that you're part of know that you stand against that. Because there is the belief by many people that there is broad agreement that they are right and that other viewpoints don't necessarily have a place in the public library. Now, you can let people know that you disagree with that, but even if you do agree with that, you can let people know that you still stand against other ideas being presented as well. So it may sound simple, but censorship wins when people allow it. Censorship wins when people are afraid to discuss it and afraid to discuss the ramifications of what it means. It's very rare in history, and I'm apologizing if I sound alarmist, it's the librarian in me with this going on. it's very rare that censorship ends well. When is the last time in history that people who were adamant about censoring beliefs or censoring viewpoints turned out to be on the right side of the march of history? And I'm not saying by any stretch that they are setting out to do something evil or setting out to do something nefarious. Very often the people who are challenging materials and books do it from a very strong and very good belief that those materials are harmful. And this is something that you see across the entire political spectrum. A lot of people like to think that it comes from the right. A lot of people like to think it comes from the left. The reality is it comes from both. But in both cases, it comes from a place where people very often believe that they are trying to protect others from dangerous ideas. Libraries stand on the premise that ideas are dangerous and that reading is important. And it's because of that that we are going to defend everyone's rights to be exposed to ideas, whether they're dangerous or whether they're not. So when you're asking about what can you do, have a conversation like that with people about the importance of a free exchange of idea and about the fact that once you start setting things aside as that can't be discussed, it's very rare that it stops.
John, this is going to be a quick answer, and then we're going to ask you another question not related to banned books. Someone missed, you showed a slide with the 13 books, and they're wondering, are those commonly challenged? Have they been banned? Was it only in 2023, 2022?
Those were just the titles from 2022, but a lot of those are perennials. A lot of those are titles that we saw in 2021. The Diary of a Part-Time Indian has been on the list for quite some time. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison is another one that has come and gone several times from that list. So those were just the titles from 2022. What was the other part of the? I'm sorry.
No, they wondered if they had been commonly challenged or banned,
Yes,
and I think you've answered.
Yeah, those are the ones that are, and there are libraries that have banned them. A challenge just means that someone's requesting for them to be removed. The banning is what happens when it actually is. And as we've seen an increase in challenges, we've seen a huge increase in the percentage that are actually banned. And what we're seeing now is that that's not just because of the actions of an individual library. It can be the actions of a state government that are leading to certain materials being removed from school libraries.
Thank you. And one last question. We've seen less issues, student fights taking place in the library in recent weeks. What has the library done to lessen such issues within the system?
A lot of steps. These were things that we actually started in the last semester and the end of the last school year. As a lot of people know, in March, we actually curtailed hours briefly. For 2 weeks, we closed the library during the school week earlier than 7 o'clock. At 3 o'clock, when we actually returned to full hours, we started putting things in place. We had the Ellicott entrance closed after school. We brought in the peacemakers. And then we've also been increasing our own security force as well. Since then, we have added we've added weapons detection systems, and then we've also started having much more robust discussions with some of the other agencies. We've really been able to establish great relationships with the Buffalo Public Schools, with Buffalo Police Department, with Sheriff's Department that is actually here in the library. We've tried as much as possible, and I think we've largely been successful at this, to create an atmosphere where everyone still feels welcome, but where there has been a heightened sensitivity to the fact that people have to follow certain behaviors when they're in the library. And the peacemakers have definitely been a huge part of that. So we hope that the trend that you've seen continues. We have no reason to think that it won't.
Dennis,
Good.
That's it. Thank you.
Joy, thank you. John, you're on the front line of in an interesting time. Freedom can be messy. Everybody seems to have a view of what it entails, but common courtesy seems at the core of it. And that's what makes libraries work. You don't have to whisper anymore. You can talk in a normal voice, but there was always the sense a library was a sacred spot in some ways, respected as such, because it manifests the whole ideas that we as a country believe in freedom of speech, freedom of reading what you want to read, freedom, period. And you strike me as a man that is a good manager of helping us in Buffalo and Erie County work our way through these challenging times. I mean, it's as simple as that. They're all around us. You can't be an island unto ourselves. So we're part of the mix. And my personal thanks to you. I'll say it for those who support the library to be doing a darn good job of meeting these challenges head on.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. And Joy, thank you and the staff for all being part of it. And I hope common decency always prevails. And maybe that's the reminder, the simple reminder that should be promoted in all sacred spaces like libraries. All right, folks, thank you very much for joining us. I think you'll do well to share this video with others. And I trust it explains a story that is out in the world and country we live in, and certainly right in our own backyard here in Buffalo. Join us next week. Jennifer Rizzo-Choi, the Executive Director of the International Institute, will be our special guest, and we'll catch up with what's going on at that wonderful establishment here in Buffalo. Folks, I'm Dennis Galecki. Thank you, be well, and have a good day.